Be my wife for 1 year, the billionaire CEO said. The woman everyone forgot said yes. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's emotional story about two women whose lives are about to collide in a way neither of them could have imagined, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story from our channel. It is quick, it is free, and it helps us continue bringing you heartfelt, dramatic, and unforgettable stories about courage, healing, second chances, and love between women. Your support truly means the world to us. And before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Share your city or country in the comments below. I always love seeing how far these stories travel and how many of us are connected through them. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let us return to our story, to a billionaire CEO who believed almost everything in life could be negotiated, and to a quiet woman everyone seemed to overlook, the woman whose simple answer would change both of their lives forever. People like us don't marry for love, Ms. Bennett. We marry when there's something worth protecting. Those were the first words Charlotte Whitmore ever spoke directly to me, and somehow they were less shocking than what came next. 3 hours earlier, I had been invisible. At 36, I was good at being invisible. I worked behind the scenes at Harbor House, a community arts center in Chicago, where my job involved donor records, scholarship applications, and remembering details everyone else forgot. That evening, our annual gala filled a downtown hotel ballroom with crystal chandeliers, white roses, and people whose watches probably cost more than my car. I fixed a misspelled place card before a major donor noticed. I found aspirin for an elderly guest with a headache. I helped a nervous server replace a tray of sparkling water after someone bumped his shoulder. Nobody asked my name. Nobody usually did. Then Charlotte Whitmore entered the ballroom. I knew who she was before anyone whispered it. Everyone did. 42 years old, billionaire founder of Whitmore Meridian Group, and the woman whose foundation provided nearly a third of Harbor House's annual funding. She wore a simple black evening gown and carried herself with the calm precision of someone accustomed to rooms changing when she entered them. People turned toward her. Conversation softened. Smiles appeared. Charlotte belonged to a world where being noticed required no effort at all. I belonged to the opposite one. Near midnight, the guests finally disappeared into waiting cars, leaving half-empty glasses, abandoned programs, and exhausted employees behind. I was stacking chairs when I noticed Charlotte standing alone beside the ballroom windows. Chicago glittered 40 floors below her. She should have looked powerful. Instead, for one unguarded second, she looked lonely. Claire Bennett, she said. I nearly looked behind me. You know my name? Charlotte glanced toward the chairs in my hands. You corrected Senator Wallace's place card, found Mrs. Callahan's medication, and convinced my foundation director not to embarrass that young server after the spill. I stared at her. You noticed all that? I notice useful people. The compliment landed strangely. Charlotte stepped closer, though she kept a respectful distance. I have an unusual problem. I work in donor archives. Unusual problems are generally above my pay grade. Something almost like a smile touched her face. Then it vanished. Her grandmother's trust, she explained, controlled voting rights tied to several charitable properties, including Harbor House. In 6 weeks, the family board would decide whether those properties remained protected or could be sold. A clause written years earlier gave Charlotte stronger control if she could demonstrate what the trust called stable family stewardship. She disliked the language. She disliked the requirement even more. But she had run out of time. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Charlotte studied me with gray eyes that suddenly seemed less certain than the rest of her. Because everyone in that ballroom wanted something from me. And you think I don't? You spent the entire evening helping people who couldn't do anything for you. The room became impossibly quiet. Charlotte drew a breath. Be my wife for 1 year. I actually laughed because the alternative was believing her. She didn't laugh with me. You're serious. Completely. You don't know me. I know enough to ask. I set the final chair down slowly. Somewhere beyond the windows, a train moved through the city like a ribbon of light. And after 1 year? I asked. For the first time that night, Charlotte Whitmore had no immediate answer. That silence told me more about her than all the magazine profiles ever had. I should have walked away. Instead, I looked at the woman everyone remembered, thought about the place everyone like me was fighting to save, and wondered what it might cost to say yes. By the time I reached my apartment that night, I had convinced myself Charlotte Whitmore had been exhausted, desperate, or temporarily out of her mind. By 9 the next morning, a black car was waiting outside my building, and I realized billionaires apparently scheduled their insanity with remarkable efficiency. Charlotte's attorney met us on the 32nd floor of a law firm overlooking Lake Michigan. The conference room table seemed long enough to seat a small government. Charlotte sat across from me with a folder positioned perfectly before her. "Before we begin," she said, "you can still walk away." I should have appreciated that. Instead, I asked the question that had followed me home. "Why me?" Charlotte paused. "Because you are discreet, independent, and unlikely to confuse this arrangement with something it is not." There it was. A clean sentence with sharp edges. I nodded as though it had not bothered me. Her attorney opened the folder and began explaining numbers large enough to make my stomach tighten. Housing. Transportation. A personal allowance. A payment after 12 months that could erase every financial worry I had carried for years. Charlotte watched me carefully. "Is the amount insufficient?" "The amount is ridiculous. It is appropriate compensation." "I do not want it." That finally unsettled her. "Everyone wants financial security. I want Harbor House protected." The room went silent. I explained that our building needed repairs, our after-school arts program had a waiting list, and 3 staff positions were likely to disappear before summer. If Charlotte wanted me to participate, Whitmore Meridian would guarantee funding for Harbor House for 5 years, regardless of what happened between us. Her attorney leaned back. Charlotte simply stared. "You could ask for anything," she said. "I am." Something changed in her expression then, small enough that I might have imagined it. She turned to her attorney. "At it." 40 minutes later, the revised agreement sat before me. I read every page. 1 year. Public appearances when reasonably necessary. Separate finances. Separate bedrooms. Either of us could end the arrangement. Harbor House funding could not be withdrawn as punishment or leverage. I insisted on that sentence myself. Charlotte signed first. Her signature was elegant and decisive. Mine looked ordinary beside it. Before signing, I looked directly at her. "There is one more condition." Her attorney sighed quietly. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead. You can rent my time. You can ask me to attend dinners, smile for cameras, and convince your board that this marriage is real. But you do not get to manage who I am." Charlotte's gaze held mine. "I would never attempt to own another person." "Good," I said. "Then we understand each other." I signed. An hour later, a jeweler arrived with several rings. I chose the simplest one, a narrow platinum band without diamonds. Charlotte seemed surprised. "That one? It looks honest." She glanced at the legal agreement between us. "Nothing about today is particularly honest. Maybe we should leave room for something that is." For once, Charlotte had nothing clever to say. She slipped a matching band onto her own finger, and the sight of it made everything suddenly real. Yesterday I had been Claire Bennett, the woman people overlooked while she cleared their tables and remembered their names. Today I was legally tied to one of the most recognizable women in Chicago. As we stepped into the elevator, Charlotte checked her phone. "Your belongings can be moved into my penthouse this afternoon." "My belongings are staying where they are until I pack them myself." She looked up. "My staff can handle it." "I know." Then why would you do it yourself? I smiled as the elevator doors opened. Because, Charlotte, you just acquired a wife on paper. You did not acquire an employee. She stared at me for half a second, then followed me into the hallway. And for the first time I heard Charlotte Whitmore laugh. Moving into Charlotte Whitmore's penthouse should have felt like stepping into another universe. In some ways, it did. The elevator opened directly into a living room larger than Harbor House's entire first floor, with pale oak floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and Lake Michigan stretching beyond the glass like an endless sheet of steel blue light. My entire life had arrived in 6 cardboard boxes, 2 suitcases, and 1 stubborn houseplant I refused to leave behind. Charlotte stared at the plant. That came with you? His name is Walter. You named a plant? You have a refrigerator that sends messages to your phone. We all make choices. Her mouth twitched. I was beginning to recognize that expression. It meant Charlotte wanted to laugh but had apparently trained herself not to. My bedroom was at the opposite end of the penthouse from hers. That should have made living together easy. It did not. Charlotte existed according to schedules precise enough to launch spacecraft. Coffee at 6:15. Calls at 6:30. Car downstairs at 7:20. Dinner appeared at whatever hour her calendar allowed, usually prepared by someone else and usually ignored. On my 3rd morning there, I found a full breakfast untouched beside her laptop. You should eat. She continued reading an email. I am eating. Coffee is not breakfast. It has calories. That is a deeply depressing argument. The next morning, I left a toasted bagel beside the coffee machine before heading to Harbor House. I said nothing. That evening, the plate was empty. I smiled all the way to my room. Then something unexpected happened. Charlotte started noticing things about me too. She noticed that I called Mrs. Alvarez every Wednesday because the 78-year-old widow hated eating dinner alone. She noticed that I carried spare gloves in my bag during Chicago winters because someone always forgot theirs. She noticed that I kept every thank you card Harbor House children had ever given me in an old blue shoebox. Why? She asked one evening, holding a card covered in crooked purple stars. Why what? Why keep all of these? Because somebody took the time to make them. Charlotte studied the card for several seconds before carefully returning it to the box. That night, a storm rolled across Chicago. Wind pressed rain against the windows, and shortly after 11, the penthouse lights went dark. I found Charlotte standing near the glass, illuminated only by the city below. Your extremely expensive apartment appears to be broken, I said. The backup system will activate. It did not. I found 2 candles in the kitchen, and somehow we ended up sitting on the floor beside the windows, looking down at headlights moving along Lakeshore Drive. Without her office, assistants, and perfectly tailored armor, Charlotte seemed different. Smaller somehow. More human. My grandmother loved storms, she said suddenly. I waited. She raised me after my parents decided their careers were more important than staying in one place. During thunderstorms, she would turn off every light and sit with me by the window. Charlotte smiled faintly. She said darkness made people pay attention to what was still there. I could have told her I understood. I could have offered some polished sentence about loss. Instead, I simply sat beside her. Minutes passed. The rain softened. You are not going to say anything? Charlotte asked. Do you need me to? She looked at me then, really looked at me. Most people do. Sometimes people need to be heard more than they need to be answered. Something shifted between us in that darkness. Not romance. Not yet. Something quieter. Trust, perhaps. The light suddenly returned, filling the room with brightness. Charlotte blinked and stood. The moment should have disappeared with the darkness. Instead, the next morning, I found 2 plates beside the coffee machine. On one sat my usual bagel. Charlotte was already at the counter with her own. Coffee is not breakfast, she said without looking at me. I smiled. I heard that somewhere. She finally met my eyes. Apparently, I have been living with a very persistent woman. For 3 days. It has been an educational 3 days. I laughed, but as I reached for my coffee, I noticed something that made me unexpectedly still. Charlotte had remembered exactly how I took it. 1 cream. No sugar. It was such a small thing. Almost nothing. But I had spent years remembering everyone else, and I could not remember the last time someone had remembered something about me. 3 weeks after I moved into Charlotte's penthouse, we attended our first major event as a married couple, and I learned that being invisible could hurt more when someone had deliberately placed you in the spotlight. The Whitmore Foundation Winter Benefit occupied the grand ballroom of a historic hotel on Michigan Avenue, where chandeliers glowed above hundreds of guests dressed as though ordinary life happened somewhere far below them. Charlotte stood beside me in a midnight blue gown, greeting donors with effortless confidence. "You are quiet," she murmured. "I am observing." "That sounds dangerous." "Only if people give me something interesting to observe." Her smile appeared for half a second. Then another donor approached, and Charlotte became the woman from magazine covers again. I watched people remember her favorite wine, her latest acquisition, even the name of her childhood boarding school. Then they turned toward me and hesitated. "And you are," one woman began. "Claire Bennett," I said. "Charlotte's wife." Her surprise lasted just a moment too long. Later, a venture capitalist asked which public relations agency had hired me for the role. I thought he was joking. He was not. "No agency," I said calmly. "I work at Harbor House." "Oh." His interest disappeared almost immediately. Charlotte shifted beside me. I knew that expression now. She was preparing to intervene. I touched her sleeve lightly. "I can answer for myself." She looked at me, then nodded. "Always." I appreciated that more than I expected. But the evening changed 20 minutes later. A server carrying coffee stopped when he saw me. "Ms. Bennett?" His entire face brightened. "You probably do not remember me." "Mr. Dawson." He blinked. "You remember? Your daughter is Maya. She painted the red lighthouse." His eyes filled with pride. "She got into the summer arts program. Full scholarship. She earned it." Charlotte had gone completely still beside me. Before Mr. Dawson left, another woman approached. She worked in hotel housekeeping and recognized me from Harbor House's weekend workshops. Then came a retired teacher whose grandson had received help with a college application. Then a young mother who hugged me and said the childcare program had allowed her to finish nursing school. None of them cared about my dress. None asked what Charlotte's company was worth. They remembered me because, at some point, I had remembered them. In the car home, Charlotte barely spoke. Chicago passed outside in streaks of gold and white. Finally, she said, "I was wrong about you." I turned toward her. "That sounds serious." "At the gala where we met, I called you useful." "I remember." It was an inadequate word. I waited. Charlotte looked through the window. "People spend years trying to make important people remember their names. You remember the names of people everyone else overlooks." My throat tightened unexpectedly. "That is not particularly impressive." Charlotte turned toward me. "Why do you always do that?" "Do what?" "Make yourself smaller whenever someone notices you." I had no answer. That frightened me more than the question. When we reached the penthouse, I escaped to the kitchen and filled a glass with water. Charlotte followed but remained several feet away. "Claire." "I am fine." "I did not ask if you were fine." I looked at her. She continued softly, "Who taught you that being unnoticed was the same thing as being humble?" The question landed somewhere I had kept locked for years. I stared at the platinum band on my finger, suddenly remembering every birthday where I served the cake, every workplace meeting where someone repeated my idea louder, every friendship where being dependable slowly became being taken for granted. Nobody taught me, I said. Maybe nobody had to. Charlotte did not offer advice. She did not try to repair the moment. She simply stayed. After a while, I whispered, people forget quiet women. Charlotte's expression softened. I do not think they should. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen expecting my usual bagel. Instead, beside my coffee sat a small white card. 3 words were written across it in Charlotte's precise handwriting. I see you. I stood there much longer than 3 words should have required, because for the first time in years, I was beginning to wonder whether being seen could change a person just as deeply as being loved. The card stayed beside the coffee machine for 11 days. I told myself I kept forgetting to throw it away, but the truth was more embarrassing. 3 words had begun to matter to me. So had the woman who wrote them. Our marriage developed routines that were never mentioned in the agreement. 2 cups of coffee appeared every morning. Charlotte started eating breakfast. I started waiting until I heard the elevator before going to bed on nights she worked late. Sometimes she texted me from meetings to ask whether I had eaten. Sometimes I sent back photographs of Walter, my houseplant, with ridiculous updates about his emotional condition. Charlotte pretended to find them annoying. Then one Tuesday she sent me a photograph from her office. Walter needs more sunlight. I laughed so loudly at Harbor House that 2 coworkers stared at me. The real change came in February, when Charlotte canceled dinner with a group of investors and appeared at Harbor House without warning. She wore a charcoal coat and shoes that had clearly never encountered sidewalk salt. What are you doing here? I asked. You said the East classroom needed repainting. Charlotte, you own a multinational company. I am aware. Have you ever painted a wall? She looked toward the volunteers holding rollers. How difficult can it be? 40 minutes later, there was pale yellow paint on her sleeve, her shoes, and somehow one side of her hair. I laughed until my stomach hurt. Charlotte looked offended for approximately 3 seconds before laughing too. The children loved her because they had no idea they were supposed to be impressed by her. One 7-year-old girl handed Charlotte a brush and told her she was missing a spot. Charlotte obeyed immediately. Watching her, I realized something that unsettled me. I liked Charlotte most when she forgot to be Charlotte Whitmore. After that day, the distance between us became harder to measure. She learned that I hated olives. I learned that she read mystery novels when she could not sleep. She knew I called my sister every Sunday. I knew she still kept her grandmother's old recipe cards even though she could barely cook. One night in early March, Charlotte returned after midnight and found me asleep on the living room sofa. I woke when a blanket settled over me. Sorry, she whispered. I did not mean to wake you. I was waiting. The words escaped before I could stop them. Charlotte froze. For me? I sat up, suddenly too awake. You were late. I told you I had a board dinner. You also told me you would be home by 11. Something warm and frightened crossed her face. You noticed. I almost laughed at the irony. Of course I noticed. She sat on the opposite end of the sofa. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows. Nobody waits for me, Charlotte finally said. Her voice was so quiet that I nearly missed it. Your staff does. They are paid to. Your board does. They wait for decisions. I understood what she meant. I had spent years believing being useful meant being valued. Charlotte had spent years believing being needed meant being loved. We had built opposite lives around almost the same loneliness. Well, I said softly, I waited. Charlotte looked at me. The space between us suddenly felt smaller, though neither of us moved. Her expression changed, becoming open in a way I had rarely seen. My heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the realization that our arrangement no longer felt like an arrangement. Charlotte seemed to realize it too. She stood abruptly and folded the blanket over the chair. This is not part of the contract. I swallowed. I know. She walked toward her bedroom, then stopped. For one impossible second, I thought she might turn around. She did not. Her door closed quietly. I remained on the sofa, staring at the empty space where she had been. Months earlier, those words would have reassured me. That night, they hurt. And that was when I finally understood the problem. Somewhere between 2 cups of coffee, a badly painted classroom, and waiting for the elevator after midnight, I had stopped pretending to be Charlotte Whitmore's wife. I had started wishing I really was. For the next 4 days, Charlotte and I became painfully polite. She left before I finished breakfast. I stopped waiting for the elevator at night. Our conversations shrank into careful sentences about schedules, dinners, and Harbor House, as if naming anything real might break the fragile peace between us. Then, on Friday morning, everything changed. I walked into the kitchen and found Charlotte standing beside the windows with her phone pressed to her ear. She looked exhausted. How bad? I asked when she ended the call. Charlotte hesitated. A reporter received information about the trust. My stomach tightened. And us? Possibly. By noon, photographs from our wedding paperwork were circulating online beside questions about how quickly our relationship had begun. By 3, Charlotte's board had called an emergency meeting. By 5, her attorney and communications director were sitting in the penthouse telling us exactly how frightened powerful people became when they could not control a story. We need a statement, the communications director said. Something factual. Calm. No unnecessary emotion. Charlotte stared at the city. And Claire? Keep her away from reporters until this settles. I hated how easily the room discussed me while I was standing inside it. Claire can hear you, I said. Charlotte turned immediately. I know. But something in her voice had changed. The warmth was gone. The chief executive officer had returned. The next afternoon, Charlotte agreed to a televised business interview. I watched from Harbor House because she had asked me not to attend. At first, the questions concerned Whitmore Meridian. Then the interviewer smiled and asked about our marriage. Charlotte's shoulders became perfectly still. There has been speculation that the timing was unusually convenient. A pause. Was your marriage connected to the Whitmore Trust? I leaned closer to the screen. Charlotte could have refused to answer. Instead, she chose the language she trusted most. Safe language. Corporate language. Claire is someone who helped me solve a complicated personal and family situation. The room around me seemed to disappear. Someone helped solve a situation. 4 phrases, and suddenly every cup of coffee, every late-night conversation, every hour at Harbor House felt foolish. The interviewer continued, but I heard almost nothing. Charlotte had once asked who taught me to make myself smaller whenever someone noticed me. Now, when the entire city was looking, she had made me small for them. I returned to the penthouse before she did. I packed the same 6 boxes and 2 suitcases I had brought months earlier. Walter went into the last box. Then I sat at the kitchen counter and removed my platinum wedding band. My hand felt strangely light without it. Charlotte arrived while I was signing the final page of a document her attorney had prepared weeks earlier in case either of us wanted to leave. Claire? She saw the boxes. Then the ring. Her face changed. Please let me explain. Was what you said true? I was protecting the company. That was not my question. Silence. I nodded because silence was an answer too. The money in the agreement is yours, Charlotte said quickly. I do not want it. Claire, do not make a financial decision because you are upset. This is not about money. I slid the signed waiver across the counter. I am giving up the payment. Harbor House keeps its 5-year guarantee because you promised that could never be used as leverage. Of course. Her voice broke slightly. I would never take that away. I know. That almost made leaving harder. Charlotte stepped closer, then stopped several feet away. What do you want me to say? I looked at the woman who could negotiate billion-dollar deals but still believed the right sentence could repair the wrong choice. I wanted you to remember my name when it mattered. Her eyes closed for a moment. I picked up my suitcase. Claire, please. I stopped at the elevator. Months ago, I had told her she could rent my time but never own who I was. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten to protect that boundary because I had fallen in love with being seen. You once told me people like you marry when there is something worth protecting, I said. Today you showed me what you chose to protect. The elevator doors opened. Charlotte said my name again, softer this time. I stepped inside anyway. As the doors closed between us, I saw her standing beside 2 untouched cups of coffee, my ring on the counter, and an empty space no amount of money could immediately fill. The penthouse became unbearable after Claire left because nothing inside it had changed. Her coffee mug was still in the cabinet. The chair she preferred still faced the lake. A single grocery list remained attached to the refrigerator, written in her neat handwriting, with bagels circled twice because apparently I had finally learned to eat breakfast. I had spent years believing loneliness meant having nobody around. Claire taught me something worse. Loneliness was knowing exactly who should be there. For 6 days, I did what I always did when something frightened me. I worked. I approved contracts, attended meetings, answered emails, and listened while executives congratulated me because the interview had calmed investors. Every time someone called the strategy successful, I heard Claire asking whether what I had said was true. On the 7th morning, I poured coffee into 2 cups without thinking. I stared at the second cup until it went cold. That afternoon, my assistant brought several folders from Harbor House that Claire had left in my home office weeks earlier. Should I have these delivered? She asked. I will take them. Buried beneath funding reports was a blue notebook. I opened it only to identify whether it belonged to Harbor House. The first page stopped me. Names. Hundreds of them. Beside each was a detail. Mrs. Alvarez, Wednesday dinners, hates thunderstorms. Maya Dawson, lighthouse paintings, wants to see the ocean. Daniel Price, needs interview clothes, prefers blue. Rebecca Cole, nursing program, childcare on Tuesdays. Page after page, Claire had recorded people the way other executives recorded assets, except her currency was attention. Near the back, I found a heading that made my breath catch. Charlotte. Beneath my name were small observations I had never told her to remember. Coffee before 6:30. Pretends not to like cinnamon. Calls grandmother's attorney every year on her birthday. Reads mysteries when anxious. Needs silence before difficult decisions. Then one final line. She thinks being needed means being loved. I closed the notebook. For the first time in my life, my wealth felt embarrassingly small. I could buy buildings, but Claire knew who needed a ride home. I could fund scholarships, but Claire knew which child was afraid to submit an application. I had believed I brought value into every room because my name opened doors. Claire brought value because she noticed who was standing outside them. The next morning, I went to Harbor House. I did not call ahead. Claire was not there. Instead, Mrs. Alvarez recognized me from the photographs and pointed toward a wall covered with plans for a new program. Second start, the sign read. Career training, childcare assistance, and mentorship for women returning to work after years spent caring for other people. Claire built this, Mrs. Alvarez said proudly. She says too many women disappear while taking care of everyone else. I stared at the photographs beneath the sign. Women in classrooms. Women practicing interviews. Women laughing around folding tables. Claire appeared in only one picture, standing at the edge of the frame. Of course she did. Even in something she created, she had made room for everyone except herself. She never told me, I whispered. Mrs. Alvarez studied me for a moment. Maybe you never asked the right questions. There was no cruelty in her voice, which somehow made the truth harder to avoid. That evening, I instructed my attorney to make Harbor House's 5-year funding guarantee unconditional and irrevocable. Then I approved separate funding for Second Start with one requirement: Claire would retain complete control of the program. No Whitmore branding. No publicity obligations. No conditions involving me. My attorney asked whether this was an attempt to win her back. No, I said, and for once I understood the difference. It is something I should have done even if she never speaks to me again. When I returned home, I placed Claire's blue notebook beside her wedding ring. Outside, Chicago glittered beneath a clear March sky. For years, I had thought Claire was the woman everyone forgot. I finally understood how wrong I had been. Claire remembered the people the world forgot. And I had become exactly like everyone else the moment it mattered most. I picked up my phone, but I did not call her. An apology was not a key that entitled me to reopen a door I had closed. If I wanted Claire to believe I had changed, then change had to exist even without her watching. For the first time in my life, I did not ask how to get back what I had lost. I asked what kind of woman I needed to become if I ever wanted to deserve it again. 3 weeks passed before Charlotte came to Harbor House again, and when I saw her through the glass doors, the first thing I noticed was what she had not brought. No driver waited at the curb. No attorney followed her. No assistant carried a folder. Charlotte stood alone in a simple gray coat, holding my blue notebook against her chest. I walked into the lobby before I could decide whether I was ready. "You found it." "I did." She held it out. "I am sorry I opened it. I was trying to identify where it belonged." I took the notebook, careful not to let our hands touch. "Thank you." There were 1,000 things she could have said next. Charlotte, for once, seemed determined not to hide behind any of them. I changed the Harbor House funding agreement. The 5-year guarantee is now unconditional and irrevocable. Second Start has separate funding, and you have complete authority over it. My name does not need to appear anywhere. I stared at her. Why? Because it deserves to exist. Even if I never come back? Her eyes held mine. Especially then. I needed to prove to myself that doing the right thing was not another negotiation. That answer reached me despite every wall I had rebuilt. We walked into the empty classroom where volunteers had painted the walls weeks earlier. A faint yellow mark remained on the baseboard from Charlotte's disastrous first attempt with a roller. She noticed it too. I was terrible at this. You were impressively terrible. A small smile appeared, then faded. Claire, I owe you an apology without an explanation attached to it. I waited. What I said in that interview reduced you to a solution. I knew better. I knew who you were, and when protecting something became difficult, I chose the thing I had spent my entire life protecting. Your company. My control. The correction surprised me. Charlotte looked around the classroom. I kept thinking money made me powerful. Then you left, and I discovered there was not a single check I could write that would make an empty home feel less empty. My throat tightened. Charlotte. Please. I am not saying that so you will come back. Her voice softened. I spent my whole life believing being needed was the same thing as being loved. People needed my decisions, my money, my name. I mistook that for connection because real connection required something I could not control. She reached into her coat pocket and placed the platinum ring on a nearby table. I looked at it but did not move. I do not want my wife back, she said. The words hurt before she continued. I want the chance to become someone you might choose when there is no contract telling you to stay. Silence filled the room. Outside, children were laughing somewhere down the hall. And if I do not choose you? I asked. Charlotte swallowed. Then Harbor House keeps its funding. Second Start remains yours. I leave you alone, and I spend the rest of my life being grateful that you taught me the difference between possessing something and valuing someone. For months, I had wanted Charlotte to see me. Standing there, I realized love demanded something more difficult. I had to see her clearly too, not as a billionaire, not as the woman who hurt me, but as a flawed person trying to become better without knowing whether there would be a reward. I picked up the ring. Charlotte's eyes dropped to my hand. I did not put it on. Instead, I closed my fingers around it. I cannot come home with you today. Pain crossed her face, but she nodded. I understand. And I cannot promise that we return to what we were. I understand that too. I stepped closer. But you could come Saturday. She looked confused. Saturday? Second Start has orientation at 9. We need volunteers to set up chairs. Wear shoes you can ruin. Charlotte stared at me, and slowly, something hopeful entered her expression. Is that another painting assignment? No. I learned my lesson. She laughed softly. Then she walked toward the door without asking for anything more. Saturday morning, Charlotte arrived at 8:45 wearing old sneakers. She did not bring flowers. She did not bring promises. She simply picked up the first folding chair and asked me where it belonged. For the first time since I had met her, Charlotte Whitmore was not trying to win. She was learning how to stay. 1 year after I first signed my name beside Charlotte Whitmore's, I stood in the same downtown law office looking at the document that was supposed to end our marriage. The conference room had not changed. Lake Michigan still stretched beyond the windows. The table was still absurdly long. But Charlotte and I were no longer sitting at opposite ends of it. In fact, there was no attorney with us at all. Charlotte had brought the original agreement because we had decided its final day belonged to us, not to lawyers. 12 months, she said quietly. You survived. Barely. Your painting skills nearly ended me. She laughed, and I thought about how rare that sound had once been. Over the previous months, Charlotte had kept coming to Harbor House. Not for photographs. Not for recognition. She stacked chairs, served coffee, helped women practice job interviews, and eventually learned how to paint a wall without wearing half the paint herself. Second Start had grown from 1 classroom into 3. 47 women had completed the first program. 29 had already found jobs. Charlotte knew every one of their names. That mattered to me more than anything she could have bought. She had changed, but so had I. I stopped standing at the edge of photographs. I accepted the position of program director. I spoke at fundraisers instead of preparing notes for someone else. For the first time, I understood that humility did not require disappearing. Charlotte had taught me that simply by refusing to let me shrink whenever I became uncomfortable with being seen. I placed the old platinum ring on the table. I had carried it for months but never worn it again. Charlotte removed hers and set it beside mine. Ready? She asked. Together, we tore the agreement in half. Then again. 12 months of conditions became scraps of paper between us. I expected relief. Instead, I felt strangely emotional. So that is it, I whispered. That is it, Charlotte said. Neither of us moved. Then she reached into her coat pocket. There is something else. I stared at her. If you pull out another contract, I am leaving. No contract. She opened her hand. A simple platinum ring rested in her palm, almost identical to the first, except for one tiny engraved word inside. Choose. My breath caught. The first time I asked you to marry me, I offered terms, money, and an expiration date, Charlotte said. I thought commitment was something you could secure if the conditions were strong enough. You taught me that staying means nothing if a person is not free to leave. She looked nervous. Charlotte Whitmore, who could address a room of 1,000 investors without blinking, was nervous because of me. Claire, would you choose me this time? I looked at the ring, then at her. For how long? A smile slowly appeared. For as long as we keep choosing each other. I held out my hand. Then yes. There was no audience. No announcement. No cameras. Just Charlotte sliding the ring onto my finger and both of us laughing when tears appeared in her eyes. That evening, Harbor House held a small fundraiser. After the final guests left, Charlotte and I stayed behind to clean up. I found her struggling with a folding chair. "You are doing it wrong," I said. "I run a multinational corporation. And yet the chair is winning." She gave me an offended look before finally getting it closed. I laughed and moved the chair 2 feet to the left. "It goes here." "That is almost exactly where I put it." "Almost is not exactly." Charlotte shook her head, smiling. Then she reached for my hand. Once, I had believed my story was about being noticed by someone powerful. I had been wrong. Charlotte did not rescue me from being forgotten, and I did not rescue her from loneliness. We simply taught each other something we had spent years failing to understand. Love was not being useful enough that someone needed you. It was not becoming small enough that nobody could reject you. It was seeing another person clearly, giving her the freedom to be fully herself, and still choosing to pull up a chair beside her. Charlotte squeezed my hand as we turned off the lights. This time, when we walked out together, neither of us was following the other.